Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight as we finish this series that we started on earlier this week. We're going to wrap up our review of letters from Christopher. So, thank you for joining me. And without delay, we're going to get started. We left off on chapter 20, and if you're new here, we are reviewing Letters from Christopher by Cherlyn Cadle, and we kind of just reviewed this book in chunks, and tonight we're going to finish it together. What I did is I took some cliff notes and took some of the best audio clips I thought came from the book. So just bear with me a few moments while I get those clips ready and allow people to kind of jump into the chat. Hear from my friend with Patty Productions. Oh, wrong clip. Hold on. All right, guys. So thank you again for joining me. I'm just going to play some video in the background here while we jump into chapter 20. Okay. One moment. Video. Sorry, guys. I'm sharing my screen. Stand by. I apologize that I'm a little behind here on this video today.
That was the objective of the agents that day. Many people helped in finding and recovering the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. The endeavor was not an easy task, but the men and women that undertook this had no idea they would need emotional help themselves when they were done. No
So chapter 20 is going to be pretty intense, guys. It is all about bringing the bodies of the girls home and how careful they had to be doing this. The other chapters ahead of this were kind of about Chris's confession. And these are going to be a lot harder to hear, but I believe you kind of have an idea of everything. So they had to be extremely, extremely careful with the removal of the bodies. And once they were able to get the girls out of the oil tanks, they actually had to be so careful. They were not able to fly them home because if there was some type of explosion or something like that, that was a serious possibility of something happening. Also, everyone involved in this rescue, you just saw some clips of the fire department that responded, hazmat units. A lot of them had to go into therapy because this was such a traumatizing event for them to endure. And I don't think people often think about how traumatizing that probably was for them. So thank you to those who do this line of work. We are going to start with the clip about Shanann's recovery. I do want to comment on that. A lot of people have asked why, just cracking open a drink real quick. People have asked why were Shanann's remains so decomposed? And I honestly, you guys, do not have the answer to that. The only thing I could really think of is the humidity in the climate in Colorado, but I really can't understand personally why the decomposition was that bad to where she was really unrecognizable. But they were pretty positive. Obviously, it was her because of his confession. But we will continue this audio clip.
The CBI agent had a phone conversation with the trooper of the hazmat team to assist in recovering the deceased victims from crude oil. The police identified the freshly moved dirt and went about extracting Shanann's body from the clandestine grave. During the extraction, the agents bagged Shanann's hands and also placed a clean sheet at the bottom of the cadaver bag in an attempt to preserve any evidence that may have been night. Shanann's body was so decomposed they could not identify her by the pictures they had, but because of Christopher telling authorities where he buried her, they felt sure it was her. After the grid search was completed, an agent was assisted with additional digging around Shanann's gravesite, using shovels in an attempt to locate Bella and Celeste's blankets and stuffed animals. No blankets or stuffed animals were located. A short time later, Weld County deputy and forensic pathologist arrived on the scene to assist with the recovery effort. The CBI contacted an agent from the Colorado State Hazardous Materials Section with an ongoing investigation. On August 16, 2018, at 5 a.m., an agent from the CBI sent a text message to agents with the Colorado State Patrol Hazardous Materials Section, CS Hazmat, advising them to contact him in reference to a CBI request. At 5:04 a.m., the trooper texted back and advised that he would be en route to Rogan, Colorado. At 5:30 a.m., the CBI agent had a phone conversation with the trooper of the hazmat team to assist in recovering the deceased victims from crude oil tanks in southeast Weld County. This stemmed from a case that Frederick police were investigating, where 3 members of a family were missing in their jurisdiction. Investigators had reason to believe that 2 of the missing persons were deceased and dumped into 2 400-barrel crude oil tanks on an Anadarko petroleum drill site.
So, yes, these clips are going to be very difficult to hear. I just want to, give you another pre-warning, you guys, about that. The reason they were not able to recover the blankets or anything like stuffed animals is because Chris threw them in the dumpster on his way back to the house when he was set to meet with law enforcement and with Nicole Atkinson. We are going to listen to a clip about Bella's recovery.
The levels were measuring about the same as the first tank. The trooper and the agent went on air at 7:53 p.m. and made entry into the tank at 7:54 p.m. The agent went in first with the trooper close behind. The agent walked over and could see a small child's body face up. I grabbed her right arm near the wrist area and moved her toward the manway. At this point, the trooper was able to secure her left arm and left leg. He and the agent then passed through the manway. The trooper grasped the left wrist and shoulder area, as the agent did the same on the right side.
Also, if you are wondering why there are some parts where they're speaking in first person, it's because I believe Cherlyn Cadle kind of messed up in the book, and she wrote it in first person as if she were reading one of the reports from the first responders on scene. So that's why it's in first person.
The victim was passed through the manway. The trooper and the agent continued to support her body as she was placed into a containment pool. During this extraction, there was some skin slippage where they had to touch the victim's body. There was also some skin on the plywood where her back made contact. The trooper and agent walked around the inside of the tank. They exited the tank and walked over to the field south of the tanks. The body was turned over to the Weld County coroner. The trooper continued to monitor the second victim using a 4-gas monitor as the Weld County coroner and pathologist attempted to remove the crude oil, utilizing several oil-absorbent pads. The second victim was then placed into a body bag and taken to the Weld County coroner's vehicle. Both bodies were decomposing and covered with crude oil. Wiggins Fire again decontaminated the two with hose spray and firefighting foam. They went off air at 7:56 p.m. The trooper and agent then went back to their response trucks and removed their PPE. They cleaned up their equipment and began putting everything away. The trooper and the agent changed back into their patrol of a small female child. They waited for the east tank battery to be offloaded into tanker trucks, which took approximately 6 hours due to the oil being methodically drained into a metal pan and then pumped into the tanker trucks through a filter. After almost all of the crude oil was removed from the tank, the rear manway cover of the tank was removed. Members of the CSP Hazmat entered the east tank and recovered a deceased female child, later identified as Celeste Watts. Celeste was covered in oil and was wearing a pink nightgown, and it could be seen she was also wearing a pull-up. Once outside the tank, there was a doctor who patted her stomach area down with oil-absorbent pads. Celeste appeared to have skin slippage and was wrapped in a white sheet, and then
Yes, that's definitely something that is horrible about this case. Lots of the investigators involved had PTSD, and I do remember in one interview, Detective Dave Baumhofer said that he would often go to restaurants and go to stores, and if he saw two girls within the same age range of Bella and Celeste, he would begin to have panic attacks and hyperventilate, and he would need to leave. Um, so definitely lots of people traumatized, lots of people who retired early after being involved in this case.
laid inside of an open body bag. After Celeste had been recovered, the CBI agent left the scene. The trooper tried to take a hold of her upper right arm and turn her over. He took a hold of her right arm as the agent lifted her by the left arm, and they moved toward the manway. The trooper grasped the left wrist and shoulder area as the agent did the same thing on the right side. As the victim passed through the manway, her left hand was degloved. The trooper and the agent continued to support her body as she was placed into a containment pool. The agent retrieved the removed skin that was from the left hand and gave it to one of the gloved Frederick police officers. The agent and the trooper then moved up the dirt berm and put it on a table. They both walked around in approximately 4 inches of crude sludge and looked for anything else in the tank that may be evidence. They did not see anything in the sludge. They exited the tank at 3:44 p.m. and walked to the field behind the tanks to be decontaminated. Someone from the Weld County Coroner's Office was on the scene and took control of the recovered body. Wiggins fire personnel sprayed them down and tried to remove as much crude oil as possible from our PPE. They went off air at 3:46 p.m. They then walked back over to their trucks, bodies. Bringing home Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Bringing the 3 girls home. That was the objective of the agents that day. Many people helped in finding and recovering the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. The endeavor was not an easy task, but the men and women that undertook this had no idea they would need emotional help themselves when they were done. No one there that day had ever had to do something as unthinkable as this. To look around the setting is Colorado's vast open land. The Survey 319 was actually a ranch that had been rented by Anadarko. The fields were thick with sunflowers and wild prairie grass that waved in the breeze, a scene too beautiful to have been part of something so evil and dark.
And as we know, after Chris was there at the site, he took a picture of those sunflowers that day and texted them to Nicole Kessinger. You can see that in the discovery. And it just goes back to how vile and disgusting he is as a human being.
Site. The police identified the freshly moved dirt and went about extracting Shanann's body from the clandestine grave. During the extraction, the agents bagged Shanann's hands and also placed a clean sheet at the bottom of the cadaver bag in an attempt to preserve any evidence that may have been present but not visible at that time. They removed her body from the scene around midnight. Shanann's body was so decomposed they could not identify her by the pictures they had. But because of Christopher telling authorities where he buried her, they felt sure it was her. After the grid search was completed, an agent was assisted with additional digging around Shanann's gravesite, using shovels, in an attempt to locate Bella and Celeste's blankets and stuffed animals. No blankets or stuffed animals were located. A short time later, Weld County deputy and forensic pathologist arrived on the scene to assist with the recovery effort. The CBI contacted an agent from the Colorado State Hazardous Materials Section with an ongoing investigation. On August 16, 2018, at 5 a.m., an agent from the CBI sent a text message to agents with the Colorado State Patrol Hazardous Materials Section, CS Hazmat, advising them to contact him in reference to a CBI request. At 5:04 a.m., the trooper texted back and advised that he would be en route to Rogan, Colorado. At 5:30 a.m., the CBI agent had a phone conversation with the trooper of the hazmat team to assist in recovering the deceased victims from crude oil tanks in southeast Weld County. This stemmed from a case that Frederick police were investigating, where 3 members of a family were missing in their jurisdiction.
So in chapter 21, it's all about the autopsies, and you can go ahead and take a look at that in the discovery if you like. I'm not really going to go into that in this video. And chapter 22 is all about the evidence. Now, you have to remember at this time, Chris was saying that Shanann was the one who killed the girls. So investigators were doing their job as best as they could while they were out on the scene at the oil field, collecting as much evidence as possible because they were getting ready to possibly go to trial. In chapter 23, it's all about Chris telling Cherlyn Cadle about his relationship with Shanann. And the entire chapter is pretty much Chris looking back at his relationship. I think one of the hardest parts of chapter 23 is to hear Chris say, Shanann was not my soulmate. And that's heartbreaking because I think for Shanann, Chris was her soulmate. And when I heard this the first time, it made me think, well, who is your soulmate then, Chris? And immediately my thoughts went to, he probably thinks Nicole Kessinger is his soulmate, which is so hard to hear that. So we'll play some clips from chapter 23. Chris also in this chapter says he's looking back at his life And the happiest day of his life, ironically, was his wedding day, um, which just seems odd after all of this happened. Instead of saying something like, the day the girls were born was the happiest day of my life, or something like that. So we'll have a listen to that.
I'm only 34 years old, and just like my family, my life stopped at this age. I took my own life. I lost my family, my house, my job, my friends, everything that meant anything to me. I know now Shanann and I were not meant for each other. I'm afraid if I tell you my thoughts, you might feel I'm blaming Shanann for what happened, but I'm not at all. We were just two completely different people, each with our own views and personalities. Mostly opposites attract and do well. That wasn't the case with us. When I really think about it, I wasn't true to myself when I first met her. Shanann was so beautiful, I remember. I just couldn't relax and be myself around her. She was confident and a real presence. I am quiet and I like the background. I tried probably too hard and always wanted to impress her, except on our first date. We were meeting at a theater, and I had no idea what kind. I was thinking of a movie theater, so I dressed in sandals, shorts, and a t-shirt. I felt like an idiot when I showed up, and she was dressed to the nines, looking so beautiful. And here I was, dressed for a night of relaxation. I felt so bad and figured she wouldn't give me a second date. But it turned out to be a great evening, and it gave us something we could always remember and laugh about. We dated for over a year, and then we got engaged. I was that day. We had a beautiful wedding, and no bride could have been more gorgeous than Shanann. Life settled into a routine, and some days were mundane, like anyone else's life. We had the girls, and they were blessings to our lives. Everything revolved around them, and we were giving them the best life possible. When I think back on what I had, I still cannot believe I lost my whole family, a family I had wanted my whole life. It's the most horrible thing I could ever do, and I'm still saying it was not my mind or my hands that did this to them, but the hands and mind being controlled by something evil. I hope people will believe me. Many things made my life a lot less than perfect. At least I thought. Although, if you were to ask me now, I might have a different story about that. Shanann had created a life for us that looked on the outside to be perfect. It almost was. Except for me. I needed to rise to the occasion and be a man, and to help my wife see she could not control everything and everyone around her. If she couldn't come to terms with that, then we split. I was not able to confront the situation, though, as I could not go to Shanann and tell her my feelings. I did not need or want such a big house. I was raised in a small ranch home, and we were perfectly happy, but not house poor. Life was much easier for my parents than it was for me when I was raising my family.
So it's, again, interesting to hear him look back at his life, and he says he's not blaming Shanann, but yet he is blaming her in a lot of these quotes we hear from him.
So because of that, I started getting up at 4 a.m. to work out. I used to weigh 245, but
I'm sorry, guys. A little bit of this clip got cut off. Chris explains in this clip that he began to grow resentful of Shanann because he wanted to work out. He wanted to lose weight. So that's what this clip is about.
I lost down to around 170. Shanann used to get dressed in running clothes and then asked me to take pictures of her so it could look like she ran with me. I remember how we would laugh about it. Some evenings I would run after I put the girls down at night, but Shanann did not like for me to do that either. I told Nikki this was one of the reasons I wanted to separate. We obviously were headed in separate directions, or at least that is one of the things I told Nikki. Now when I say that, I can see how shallow it sounds. I told everyone we had been talking about separating for the last few months, but honestly, we were not. Shanann was blindsided by all of what was happening when I was building walls between us. I felt like if I built walls, I wouldn't have to explain anything to Shanann. I did sleep in the basement sometime, but only at the very end, after we got back from North Carolina. We went to San Diego on June 22nd and came home on June 26th. Shanann and the girls left that afternoon, and my life then quickly spiraled out of control.
Okay, so this is kind of the first time we hear Chris say, yeah, she was blindsided. She had no idea that I wanted to end our marriage. However, we do hear some contradicting statements shortly after Shanann was missing, according to some of the employees at the hair salon. They said that, they were just kind of having some daily gossip at the salon, and it was mentioned that their relationship was rocky and that Shanann might consider separating and divorcing him. You can go ahead and watch that video clip. Actually, we can play it at the end if you haven't heard it before. There's also an interview with an attorney who was having like a hibachi style dinner with Shanann and a friend while Shanann was in North Carolina. And she begins to ask this family attorney who she'd never met, just the first time meeting him. They were sitting in a style where, if you've never had hibachi, it's like a setting where you're sitting next to strangers. Somehow a conversation started in regards to divorce, and Shanann was asking questions about custody and how that works. So people speculate that Shanann was possibly preparing herself for divorce. But then you heard in that clip Chris say there was never a real discussion about having a separation or getting a divorce. Also in this chapter, Chris talks about a part of this time that they had to live with one of Shanann's friends while their house was being built. And Chris says that that friend and Shanann had a falling out. And to this day, he still doesn't know why they had a falling out. And that is kind of an interesting part of this chapter. And I do not believe that friend has ever spoken out since. So
choices I made that morning of August 13th will and should haunt me for the rest of my life. I hear my baby's voice every day as she tried to stop me from killing her. After I was in prison and after I was moved to Wisconsin, I received a letter from a woman I did not know, and she said she did not know me. She had heard something briefly on the television about the case, but said she really did not pay much attention to it. So she was not at all familiar with the story. She wrote to me about a dream she had a couple of nights before. In her dream, she was walking past a room and saw a baby bed in the room and could hear a small child crying. She walked into the room and noticed something was dripping out from under the baby's bed. It was dripping onto the floor. She walked over to the bed, looked, and saw a little girl covered in liquid. It was all over the child, so she picked up the little girl who said, "I am having so much fun up here." The woman realized the small child was covered in gas. She woke up and was very disturbed by the dream. She remembered something about gasoline from the news. She did not remember my name or anything else pertaining to the case, so she Googled it and found the story. When she saw pictures of my family, she told me she realized that the little girl in her dream was Bella. She said she was writing me to let me know they are in heaven, and I did not need to keep beating myself up over what happened. I wrote her back, but I never heard from her again. I appreciated her writing to me about the dream, but I already know without any doubt that Bella is in heaven. As far as beating myself up, that will happen for as long as I live. My life, for all intents and purposes, was over. And then I received a letter that lit a fire in me. I was told God could still use me, and that I can help others. Maybe I could reach those who are planning.
And then Chris goes on to say in the book that this happened to him, so that he could possibly reach other people and prevent someone else from doing something similar, which we know is just exactly what you said, just a nut job, right? And here is one more quote from chapter 23 that I thought was interesting, and it is where Chris discusses that he talks about Shanann and possibly custody of the girls. So to me, this is a little confusing.
Same. I realize now we should have gotten counseling. Shanann wanted to, but by then, I felt our marriage was too far gone. I was also tired of how controlling she was, and I was especially tired of her keeping me and the girls from my family. There wasn't a good reason for me to be kept from them. In the morning, that's probably the main thing I was so angry with Shanann about, being told she would keep the girls from me. When Shanann would get so upset with my family, it worked on me. The drama from it was constant, and I regret saying some horrible things to my parents. They never fought back. They lived so far away and were honestly willing to help whenever we needed anything. I regret I never tried to remain close to them, mostly because I was trying to do what would make Shanann happy at the time. But I didn't want to be told I could not see them either. It always seemed when she would have problems with my mom and sister, she would then want me to step in, call.
So this part of the book is very confusing because Chris again claims he was not in a rage that morning, but yet in this clip, he says, I was angry because she was telling me she was going to keep the kids. Now, in an earlier chapter, we know that this statement contradicts the fact that Chris said he was planning to kill all of them in the first place. So we'll just play this clip one more time for you to hear, which doesn't make sense compared to what he says in an earlier chapter.
same. I realize now we should have got counseling. Shanann wanted to, but by then, I felt our marriage was too far gone. I was also tired of how controlling she was. And I was especially tired of her keeping me and the girls from my family. There wasn't a good reason for me to be kept from them. In the morning, that's probably the main thing I was so angry with Shanann about, being told she would keep the girls from me. When Shanann would get so upset with my family, it worked on me. The drama from it was constant, and I regret saying some horrible things to my parents. They never fought back. They lived so far away and were honestly willing to help whenever we needed anything. I regret I never tried to remain close to them, mostly because I was trying to do what would make Shanann happy at the time. But I didn't want to be told I could not see them either. It always seemed when she would have problems with my mom and sister, she would then want me to step in, call.
So again, you kind of hear Chris talking about him being angry that Shanann kind of caused distance between him and his family. However, there's lots of people who have relationships with their family and their spouses are not involved. You know, they may go visit their mom and dad, but the husband doesn't come or the wife doesn't come. And it's just a mutual respect of, you may not get along with my family, but I'm still going to be part of my family's life. And then there's some families that totally get along and everyone's great. But I think we all know that the only person to blame for any distance is Chris. You know, you have every right to go see your family if you want to. And if you weren't man enough to stand up and say, I'm going to go spend time with my family, then that's on you. It's not Shanann's fault. It's your fault. Also, in this chapter, Chris talks about how Nikki is a victim and shouldn't be blamed, which I thought was interesting in this chapter. And we all know that she is not seen as a victim, and it sounds a little bit like now he's also changing his tune since he's behind bars as well. And let's see what I have for chapter 25. In chapter 24, I didn't take any audio clips, but that part of the book is all about the Weld County Jail, and that there were 3 weird occurrences that happened at the house. And you may know 2 of them where police were called because there were lights on at the house. After, you know, no one was there anymore. Nate called the police at one point because he saw a woman get out of a car and walk up to the front door. When police arrived, there was no one there. Then there's another video we see where officers enter the house, and you can just tell that they are on guard. They are startled. And I believe it was Frank Sr. or it was Sandy who called Frederick, Colorado police and said that they got an alert that the door was open at the house, which was very creepy. We're going to jump into chapter 25, where Chris kind of talks about Bella having a 6th sense.
It almost seems Bella had some sort of a 6th sense. Even though a child, she must have felt something awful was going to happen. Maybe that is the reason she was so cautious and timid. She didn't know how to express those feelings yet. Those were things she knew nothing about. As Christopher put Bella in his truck that morning, it's hard to imagine how scared that little girl must have been. Her whole world as she knew it was falling out from under her. Yet she had a thread of trust that her dad was going to make it okay. She had no idea at that moment her dad was going to steal her life.
So absolutely just heartbreaking to hear that. Um, Later in this chapter, Chris talks about how he was not able to see or talk to his parents until sentencing day. And this is very true, why some people will say, that they feel some of the comments the family makes at sentencing are odd. Well, you have to remember at the sentencing hearing, they did not know the details of what happened. They were still under the assumption that Shanann was the one that hurt the children and that Chris did what Shanann did, which we know is not true now. But unfortunately, personally, I feel that Chris has made his parents look like absolute fools by lying, continuing to lie to them. And of course, they love him still. It's their son, but they are still, I think, being treated like garbage by Chris, and always have been treated like garbage by Chris, since he started dating, I guess, is the best way to explain it, I feel. Chris in this chapter said he was eager to plead guilty because he didn't want the death penalty. Isn't that interesting, guys? He didn't want the death penalty. And part of his plea agreement, he had to seal the records of the girls to get life in prison, if you did not know that. District Attorney Michael Rourke wanted to seek the death penalty. But the reason that Chris didn't get it is because Shanann's mother said no. Chris claims in this chapter that he always planned to plead guilty no matter what, which seems absolutely stupid. If you were going to commit a crime, you're already like thinking, I'm going to plead guilty. I don't believe any of that for a second. I think that Chris, really his initial try to take Shanann out was with the oxycodone in North Carolina. And I think that what Chris would have done is just probably given custody of the girls to her parents, because they, of course, would have absolutely swooped in and taken the children. And then Chris could visit them whenever he felt like it and then go live his life with Nicole Kessinger. That is what I think was the plan all along, but it didn't work the way he planned it. In chapter 25, moving along, Chris talks about seeing his family before sentencing and how hard it was for him. Cherlyn Cadle, the author, talks more about the girls and how the families on both sides have suffered and how cruel people have been to both parties. So I'll play a couple clips from this chapter. Chris talks a little bit in this chapter about what his new life is. And he talks about this moment in this chapter, which is very creepy, that he prayed to God to be transferred out of Colorado. And the next morning, he was transferred to Wisconsin.
jail. Christopher was in the Colorado prison for 7.5 weeks, during which time he was threatened, yelled at by the other inmates, and told ways he could kill himself. They would scream almost constantly at him for a while, until, as he says, they either lost interest, or since he had no reaction, they realized they couldn't get to him, so they stopped. Had they been able to get to him, though, they would have most definitely killed him. He was on suicide watch. He had not even a pillow or blanket, only a small pad to lay on a cement floor. He was in a state of extreme trauma from what had happened, and nothing still made sense to him. Because of that, where they can buy extras, such as toothpaste, deodorant, and personal items. One of the hardest things to get used to is no privacy. There is no freedom in prison. For holidays and birthdays, he might be able to purchase a card he can write in and send. He buys those things with commissary money. He says he has already lost the knowledge of what things cost out of prison. Christopher will never be at a birthday party again, have birthday cake, or enjoy going out to dinner with his wife for her birthday or their anniversary. He misses things such as washing his car, mowing the lawn, or feeling the rain or snow on his skin. He'll never go swimming again or grocery shopping. He'll never go golfing or go to a car race with his dad. Holidays are not recognized at the prison, so he will never again enjoy or look forward to celebrating an upcoming event. He will never have another love. Christmas of 2018, only 4 months from the murders, was an extremely lonely time. He did not have a Christmas tree, didn't get to take his girls for sledding, didn't play Santa Claus, and didn't trim the tree with his family. A hard thing for him is realizing Bella would have turned 5 that month. How much was lost?
Now, we know some of these statements are not true. I'm sure that Chris will be within his life outside on the prison yard at one point, and it might start raining. And yes, he will feel rain on his skin, but Shanann and her girls and Nico will not. He says he'll never feel love again, which is not true. Chris already has a new girlfriend. He's had a girlfriend for a year now, Lizzie Henderson. She is the only one who has been visiting him lately, and I think that's all he deserves, honestly. I don't think his parents should spend the money and time to visit him after the way he has treated them and made them look like idiots by lying to them, and just being disrespectful all around to them. Also, let's see, in this chapter, he talks about when Christopher is in I think it was after sentencing, the Rusick family reached out to Chris, and it was on June 25th, 2019. The lawyers called to have like a probate conversation. And in this conversation, Chris claims that Frank Rusick told him that he loved him. And I'm not sure if I believe Chris or not, but apparently in this conversation, Chris signed the deed over to the house to the Rusick family, and during this conversation, he claims, Frank said, "Thank you, I love you."
On June 25th, 2019, lawyers for Frank and Sandy Rusek called Christopher to discuss the probate with them. Christopher signed absolutely everything over to the Ruseks. When the conversation with the lawyers was over, according to Christopher, Frank Rusek came to the phone and said, "Thank you, Chris." To which Christopher replied, "You are welcome, and I love you guys." Frank responded, "Love you." What a wonderful, freeing thing that is, for the Ruseks still to be able to love or forgive him is such a...
Like I said, I'm not sure if that statement is true. If Frank said it, I think maybe he just said it out of habit, not really realizing what he was saying. Moving along to chapter 27, Chris says he keeps asking himself over and over again why this happened. The most interesting part of the book, I feel like, is in this chapter. It says on August 15th, Chris came to jail, and this is where he says, he was pretty much unpossessed, I guess, if that's what he calls it.
She is 93 and has dementia. I know it's hard for my dad some days to go see her, even though she doesn't recognize him. He had me on speakerphone the other day, and she could hear my voice. I said hi to her, and my dad said she smiled really big. That made my day. I hope you are doing well, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. God bless. Chris. The following letter he wrote tells of coming face to face with the dark spirits he says were pursuing him. In this letter, Christopher refers to wearing a turtle suit. Turtle suit. An anti-suicide smock. Bam Bam suit, or suicide gown, is a tear-resistant, single-piece outer garment that is generally used to prevent a hospitalized, incarcerated, or otherwise detained individual from forming a noose with the garment to commit suicide. Dear Cherlyn, hello again. I hope you're doing well. I think that Wisconsin weather can compare to Colorado's weather, as it can vary so much from one day to another. I think spring hit for a week, then summer for a day, and now it's been a mixture of fall-winter the last few days. I would say I'd rather be cold than hot, especially in this little shoebox I'm in. Okay, let me start right into the Weld County Jail experience. I arrive at the Weld County Jail the night of August 15th. I get booked, fingerprinted, and my picture taken, and then escorted by a deputy and 2 technical officers to the unit I'm staying in. One of the officers, as he's slamming my door shut, says, "Good luck." I'm standing there alone in the darkness. The only light was that of a dim nightlight used for guards to check on you. I'm standing there wondering, is this my normal for the rest of my life? I lay down in the bunk in my turtle suit, as I'm in their suicide watch pod, and just stare off into the darkness. Nothing is adding up, and it feels like none of this can be real. To my astonishment, I look in the front corner of my cell and see 2 dark figures standing there. I thought, okay, this is my eyes playing tricks on me. So I closed them and opened my eyes again, and yet they are still there. As I focus more intently, I can see one is male and one is female. The male is in a black suit and the female is in a black dress with a Victorian-style hat. Both their wardrobes looked vintage. Their faces were ash-colored and almost familiar, until the familiar feeling turned into a sure thing. This was my grandfather and grandmother on my mom's side, their faces being unmistakable now. I almost want to move closer to them when their eyes opened in unison. They motioned me toward them, but I was frozen, and I knew I didn't want to go toward them. Their eyes were as red as blood, crimson. This eerie feeling came over me as I had 4 eyes staring back at me, as if piercing my soul in a bad way. The only problem was, I felt like I was in a trance and had to keep eye contact. Somehow, they would not let my eyes move off of them. I felt like I needed to go over to them, as the one motioned his hand for me to come near. But all of a sudden, something broke the trance. I looked away and looked back, and the corner of my cell was empty. The pair was gone. I obviously couldn't sleep much after this event.
So, unfortunately, guys, I do have to end the live stream here, and we will pick up again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me, and I apologize for cutting it short, but there's still lots to cover in the last 2 chapters, and I hope you'll join me again